be named, it's true. Hi, I'm Janice Pang. I work in institutional research. Lillian gave me the opportunity to interview her about her life and times at Stanford, and so I thought I would do a write-up for you guys and hear some of the stories, some of the scoop. No one who knows Lillian will be surprised to learn how she got her first job after college. She had just graduated with a degree in visual and environmental studies from Harvard, and she thought it'd be cool to maybe be a book designer. So she called Houghton Mifflin and asked for an informational interview. They were so impressed by her at the interview that they offered her a job because they had a staff member who was going on maternity leave the next week, except that the staff member didn't go on maternity leave. And so they had to rescind the offer, and although she was crushed by disappointment, Lillian wrote a gracious letter saying how much she had looked forward to working with them, and concluded with, "If another opportunity comes up, please keep me in mind." A week later, they called back, and they said they wanted to hire her anyway. She spent 6 years there, learning how to lay out pages and work with artists, and giving her a knowledge of typeface and layout design that comes in useful to this day. And although I'm sure the Harvard resume didn't hurt in getting the job, I'm sure it was also her graciousness which secured it for her. She came to Stanford in 1981 to pursue a master's degree in East Asian Studies. Her first impressions of Stanford were not that positive. "This place is so suburban," she remembers thinking. "The weather is really boring." Although she never completed that program, it led her to two very different but important discoveries. The first was that she met her husband, Doug, in Chinese class. The second was that she took her first job at Stanford, working for Connie Chin in East Asian Studies. Lillian managed a grant for the Department of Education, learning about indirect costs, expense tracking, and report preparation. Little did she realize that several of these areas would prove crucial to her design of the expenditure star a couple of decades ago. The job in East Asian Studies led to a job in desktop computing and support. Lillian enjoyed her time trundling all over campus to help users with their new computers. "You never knew what the problem would be," she said. Two cases she remembers in particular was one in which the printer was not attached to the computer, and another one in which someone had inserted the floppy disk upside down. She discovered that she had a talent and affinity for troubleshooting, and remembers that people were so grateful even if you just fixed the simplest thing. When the SUFIN project started to look for a trainer, they decided to hire Lillian. She was the midwife who eased the administrative staff on campus off of paper forms and onto the new online financial systems SUFIN, SNAP, and CRIS. She developed all the training materials for SUFIN and trained both users and other trainers. Teaching classes 2 or 3 times a quarter gave her plenty of opportunities to hone her teaching chops. She experimented with small groups and hands-on learning. Her earlier work as an art editor made her very aware of the impact of good design on instructional materials. She also created the first online newsletter on campus. One day the power went out during her class, and instead of canceling class, she decided to sit on the desk and said to her class, "Imagine pressing this button." Class. 45 minutes later, the power came back on. I think she got good reviews for that class too. By the time she left her SUFIN job, every department had a computer and an email, and she had succeeded in 3 years in training all of the administrative staff to switch over to SUFIN. Lillian's personal life was also progressing quite nicely. She had had 2 kids, and upon returning from her second maternity leave, she decided she didn't want to work 75% time anymore. She wanted to work 50% time. Her manager balked at this, so she sent out an email saying, "Does anyone want Lillian Lee at 50% time?" I sympathize with this. And John Sack wisely said yes, and he gave her a choice of what she wanted to learn, and she thought, data warehousing, that sounds interesting. In 1993, Stanford's data warehousing team was on the cutting edge of design technology. Several members of this team would eventually leave Stanford to form their own well-known consultancies. Lillian began by documenting and training, and then progressed to learning to run the monthly jobs, and eventually modeling data. She learned some of the fundamental concepts of data warehousing, such as importing all subject areas into a data warehouse instead of keeping them separate. The importance of creating a unique person ID was driven home to her when she found a case of two twins who worked at Stanford. They had the same first name, the same last name, same birth date, they worked in the same work unit. The only way that they were different on paper is they had different middle names, so they also started with the same middle initial. And they had different university IDs, so there's the importance of the university ID. Despite once having to wear a pager and working during New Year's Day, Lillian remembers this time as being kind of fun in an adrenaline-filled way. But the early 2000s were a turbulent time in IT at Stanford. The university decided to adopt an out-of-the-box enterprise solution, Oracle Financials, and PeopleSoft HR and Student, replacing its homegrown hierarchical databases of financial and student data. The original warehouse team was disbanded. Legions of consultants came in to implement the new software. And the university was trying, rather uneasily, to use solutions developed for for-profit companies to run its business. Reporting was a major problem. For many of these enterprise applications, reports were an afterthought. Companies hadn't realized that, as Lillian said, for really robust reporting, you can't just point a query tool at the transaction tables. I'm looking at you, degree audit. The need for financial reporting in particular was especially acute. Into this void stepped Charles Stewart, who had just been reading up on star schemas and Ralph Kindle's new ideas about dimensional modeling, which is a way of formulating data to access really complex data really quickly. Charles, Lakshmi, Venkatron, and Lillian under Nan McKenna were chartered with building the expenditure, budgeting, and commitment star schemas. They had 18 months. Lillian's experience as a grants administrator gave her insights into the kinds of practical formats and data folks really needed. She realized, for example, that staff would need indirect cost rates for individual items, even though they were always summarized in the Oracle tables. So she created shadow tables that would store these data at the right grain of detail. The creation of the expenditure star is still one of her proudest accomplishments at Stanford. It gave me the chutzpah to know that I could do Cirrus, she told me. Even though those 18 months were filled with very long, intense days, working with Charles and Lakshmi was one of the highlights of her Stanford career. After the successful implementation of those schemas, she rejoined the newly reformed Enterprise Data Warehouse team. She helped bridge the charge of accounts between legacy systems and Oracle Financials. If you had visited her office in Polio one of these years during Christmas, you might have seen a star schema designed around Santa's delivery of presents at Christmas, including a yes-no chimney indicator and size of the present relative to size of the sleigh. Lillian remembers fondly John Clem's videos that used to grace our Christmas celebrations, and in one of those videos she sings the alphabet backwards. We were hoping to have that for you today, but I don't think we do. Then in 2007 came one of those periodic sweeping reorgs of the IT staff, during which large numbers of people had to reapply for a much smaller number of jobs. And Lillian qualified for retirement, so she actually retired then. And she was gone for 2 years. She was the team mom for the robotics team in high school. But then eventually Ronna Glasgow tempted her to come back to help decode Bill Weiler's teaching load process. Because of course, that's how you tell someone to come back to Stanford. There's this really complex process that involves a lot of real queries, and we take the data and we dump it into Excel, and then we manipulate it for a few more days. And can you fix that? Yeah, that was the skill, but she came back and she did fix it. And she decided to join Ronna's group, IR&DS, along with Kathy Muller and a whole bunch of other folks. She spent a year doing traditional institutional research work, including filing the U.S. News and World Report stats and producing the external stats books. And we're starting to come to current times now. She helped us import the census data into the DSS database. So, as many of you know, for many decades, Patty McGowan would run an annual fall census for the university, and this is one of the key data points for us. And first of all, Lillian helped bring those data into a modern database, but then she and Emma Barbara re-engineered the process and figured out what was really happening. They ran both processes in parallel for a while, and finally in 2012 they switched over entirely to the new code. This was a really big step for the university because it got us off of a really archaic SAS program. And as a bonus, she created dashboards in this new tool called OBIEE. So although she was busy running teaching load census and student enrollment snapshots, Lillian saw a campus need for better student reporting, one that would take the existing PeopleSoft student data and make it more user-friendly. She volunteered for the CIRRUS, Student Integrated Reporting Information System project, because I thought it would be cool. I'm not going to talk too much more about CIRRUS because I know some of the other speakers are going to mention it, but I personally will always be grateful for CIRRUS because it allowed me to work very closely with Lillian. So if someone at the beginning of their career at Stanford were wondering, what does a successful 30-year career look like at Stanford? Lillian's would be a very interesting case. What strikes me is that in hindsight, it all makes a kind of logical, cumulative sense, even though she didn't follow a preordained path. CIRRUS was a culmination of Lillian's time at Stanford, in part because it required so many of the skills that she had developed in different jobs along the way: data modeling, instructional design, training, newsletter writing, data analysis, troubleshooting, desktop support, and even layout and design. I felt like I was the best equipped person I could think of, she said, and I think she was right. At the same time, the person developing these many different skills has always been remarkably consistent. Lillian has always shown a commitment to quality work, intelligent, creative solutions to sometimes seemingly intractable problems, and also notable care for all the people who work with her. She is the person who will bring you a cupcake on your birthday, stay later at night to mentor younger staff, and print out guinea pig stickers for those who help her test. She might be the person who helped you with SUFN 30 years ago, or just as easily the person who helped you with your SQL query last week. Lillian's time at Stanford parallels the growth in personal computing, and she has been there all along to help ease campus users onto these new technologies. In the early 80s, she showed us how to use our email. And by 2015, she was showing us how to view a decade's worth of degree data in online dashboards. Looking back over her time at Stanford, she told me, at its best, Stanford is a great environment. I believe in its overall mission. My favorite times have been when the work is interesting and the colleagues are really compatible. She told me that when she first moved here, I never intended in a million years either to live in California or work at Stanford. But if you're one of the literally hundreds of people on campus that she has helped over all these years, you will remember her quiet humor, sharp intelligence, and radiant kindness, and be so glad that she stayed.